Catholic.
Catholic. Controversial. So I went to the Whitney Plantation this past weekend. Had heard a lot about it, and I had been at a couple of like festivals or conferences where they, that was one of the add-ons that you could do, and I just had never done it because I'm particular about visiting those types of spaces, just like I'm particular about, watching certain movies,
Yes.
because I do believe there is, whether it's intentional or not, um, there is this, for me, it feels like there is this, I don't even know how to say it. There's a play in trauma, right? There's this,
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes I think,
Vicarious trauma that you're experiencing vicarious trauma just from the exposure to what you know happened,
right,
and it has a deeper level because there is a real connection biologically, right? Somewhere in your
cellularly,
history,
biologically, yes,
people actually experience this. So it's not
yes,
just theoretical. And so
yes,
so there's both trauma. So there's for everybody, anybody walking into
yep,
that place is going to experience some vicarious trauma if they are human and have a heart, because what happened was traumatizing. But then when you
yeah,
add the biological, somebody somebody
yes,
in your actual bloodline,
yes.
somebody and experience these things, that adds to the vicarious trauma whole
Absolutely. And
experience.
so there's that physical piece. I deeply believe in the emotion, like the emotional and the spiritual connection to
The
it and
energy,
feeling
yes.
the
Places
energies that
have
exist
energy.
there. And
Yes.
I have actually, experienced being in some places and being like, this is not a good place for whatever else, for whatever reason. And then learning later, oh, there was huge whatever that
Yeah,
happened.
there's really something to the energy of places. You
Yes,
can feel it when you walk into
absolutely.
most churches. You feel a sense of calm, right? There's a
Right.
different energy there. Well, same thing. So a place like what you're describing, a plantation, has the energy of
Correct.
the accumulative trauma of that
Exactly.
space.
And again, I think, so there's that piece, but there's also, I just feel like in general, there seems to be, a lot of stories that I think when it comes to like that time period or, whatever, even for like Black History Month, it's always about the like victimization. It's always, or even like some of the Black movies, that films that do well are like about poverty and, fighting gangs and, drugs and all these other things. And so, I'm very cautious and mindful and intentional about what I consume for all of these things, for reasons that you just shared.
Yes.
So anyway, but I'd always heard really great things about the Whitney is in regards to kind of how they have set this whole space up. And so I went on Sunday, and again, I was kind of fully walked in prepared to be like, okay, you're gonna feel some things like emotionally, physically, all of this stuff. And I was so almost shocked that I felt such peace on
Yeah.
this property.
Mhm.
And such peace, given the fact that there are a lot of their original structures. So it's not like it's all
Mhm.
reconstructed or whatever. I mean, obviously they've had to do some repairs and things like that, but their actual, like, I believe they have seven, I think, slave quarters or cabins,
Mhm.
and two of them were actually on that property, lived in from there, and then the other five were from other plantations around the area, so
Oh,
they had
wow.
brought them on.
Mhm.
But and then you're able to like walk into the plantation, into the slave quarters. You're able to walk into the big house. Um, they have the overseer's house that was there. You were able to walk into the kitchen, and
Mhm.
it's all, most of it is, outside obviously, and then you can just go into these spaces. And you can do a guided tour with someone who, works there, or you can do an audio. So I opted to do the audio. And it just was, I just have never seen or experienced such a honest, I think, discussion or display of like the horrors that went on as like a regular thing
Mhm.
on um on a plantation, and highlighted and gave like honor, respect, like autonomy to the enslaved that were on the property that worked there. right, or enslaved there. So it was like, they didn't, because like you usually will see they'll be like, oh, well, like for Notting Way, I saw a recorded a guide. They recorded the guide like doing one of
Mhm.
their tours. And at one point the woman said, and I'm not going to get it completely correct, but to the effect of like, oh, well, like the slaves on the Notting Way plantation were actually treated relatively well, given, what was happening on other plantations. And you know what? They even had a garden to grow their own food. And it was like, I was like, wait a minute, I work sun up to sundown, and then I gotta grow my own food to feed myself so I can sustain myself to be in the fields. And you think that's like,
Good. Yeah.
you know? Um, and then there was a gentleman who had worked at the Nottoway plantation, and he said that that they were actually trained and like they were told you were not allowed to, if somebody like asks a question about like slavery was a footnote in their tours. It was more of like the
Wow.
grandeur and the beauty of the antebellum South and all of those.
Yes.
So going back to the Whitney plantation, I mean, they talked about the different roles that enslaved people had. So from like, working in the kitchen and how, it was just very balanced, I guess I could say, because it was like they talked about working as a domestic slave or being enslaved as a domestic worker,
Mhm.
had its benefits. Like you were able to, maybe um have different out like you worked at different times or you did this or like you had access to maybe like better food, better quality food. You obviously weren't working in the sun all day, but then they talked about the fact that but you were also like living side by side with your enslaver.
Yes.
And so you were at the mercy of whatever whim, whatever feeling, whatever emotion. There was a lot of more sexual violence because you were accessible,
Right.
and so it was just this thing like, we're not going to say it's good, bad, or whatever, but they were saying like, this was the life, this was the experience. So, on one hand, okay, you might have been able to eat because they also like if they had people coming to visit, they didn't want to see somebody who was sickly looking. So they would feed you to be like, oh, we want to show that we take care of our people or we're wealthy and we have this. On the other hand, you're getting like woke out of your sleep because, the mistress can't sleep and she doesn't want you to sleep either, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
And so they just did this really, I think, amazing, like it just felt very truthful. They talked about like where if you worked in the field, they talked about some women and some men were used as just breeders, and were your sole goal purpose here is to birth children so that we can sell. And again, I just have never, while I know that because of the work and the study that I've done, I've never seen it just like told this directly and just this like honestly and it was brutal in some places. But then they would talk about the balls that the enslaved people would have at night. Um, you know, we call them like they called them balls, but they would go out to these cabins and they would like find joy and they would find, ways to connect,
Mhm.
the laying out, right? Where they would like feign incompetence because they didn't want to, or they would break tools, or, they would do these things so that they could cover each other if they had to go somewhere or had to do something.
Mhm.
That they would have, do prayers in the field and they'd have somebody watching out, like to see when the driver was coming to be able to, like, okay, like stop, and it was just this, like, it just felt like, again, it's just such an honest and respectful, I think, display of the hardship, the trauma, the horrors, the brutality of it all, while still allowing their humanity.
Yes. And finding joy. What I'm hearing also is the ways under such incredibly traumatic and challenging circumstances, the ways people still sought joy and resilience and continuing to move forward despite the
And
circumstances.
I see, and resilience is is a word that I think we use so often. It's like, oh, be resilient, be this, and there's so much responsibility, there's so much work in just doing that, and so yes, it's that. But I was like, but I think of it as like autonomy, independence, like in this environment where you don't necessarily own your own body, they still found ways to own their own body, right? They
Yes.
still found ways to dance, and I walked away with this like commitment. I was like, I do I enjoy that? Do I like possess that type of freedom, and how can I, like give honor to them for all the ways that they found, like you said, joy, that they
Yeah.
um and not even like search for, like experienced it, right? Like that was one thing. It was like you can enslave my body, you can maybe enslave a little bit of my mind, or at least what the I have access to, but yet I am still going to learn. I'm still going to learn
Love.
about my environment. I'm
Mhm.
going to learn about herbs. I'm going to learn about how to love one another or treat or raise or do these things. I'm going to learn how to like do my hair. I'm going to learn, like all of these things. And again, I just thought like I said, I walked and I was like, I read, I mean, there's like a wall of honor that has all of
Mhm.
the names of as many as of the enslaved people that they could find. They're all up there. And then they're like scattered across there are like quotes, and some of the quotes are like, I got beat every single day, I got this, I saw this is how it was. But it just felt like it was a place where their voice was heard and was is remembered. um
And that might be why the energy was so peaceful, because they were heard, they were remembered, so they were present and real. And so they didn't have to continue fighting to be heard, to be seen, that it was there. I want to point out a couple things that you said.
yeah.
Um, of course, I should have written them down, but the one specifically is the language, the use of slave versus enslaved. Right? And I noticed that you've been very mindful of that language, and that's really important. I want to make sure that anybody listening to this is noticing that when we use slave, right, that's putting so much of the weight on the people who were enslaved.
Hmm.
And when we use the word enslaved, it really acknowledges the situation where someone else was striving to have power
Hmm.
over the people who were living enslaved. And but I love your focus on people finding the freedom that they could, and really living in that, and to understand that you can enslave the body, but so many of our beautiful songs from that time was about being still finding freedom despite the circumstances. And so it sounds like really someplace I need to go, because I also shy away from some of those experiences, because then you end up walking away just mad, because like this is not the whole story, or they're giving the bottom line, they're focusing on all these other things, and this sounds like such a balanced presentation that is therefore educational and connected, and yes, at points I'm sure sad, but also because of the at points joy. Then you
Yes.
leave feeling more balanced and at peace, as this is part of our history. But
Hmm.
let's show the real history. Let's
Yes.
not pretend like these things were so much better than they were, but let's also show the joy. And when I say resilience, I'm really focusing on the I like your word better, like finding the freedom that you can under those circumstances. I think that's what I think of when I say
Hmm.
resilience. And let's focus on that, because it fills the heart with some joy to know that people were able to do that. And it also is I always found, under my most difficult times, I think of the fact that I know I've had ancestors that had to find their ways of feeling free under such circumstances. So whatever I've ever been through, remembering that helps me be grateful for the moment that I'm in, and know that if my ancestors could endure enslavement and find joy and keep going, right?
Hmm.
Keep going. Because not that obviously this didn't happen, but everybody could have said, you know what, we're out of, like, let's just all kill ourselves. Like, just then this will be done and it'll be over. But no, we laughed, we danced, we sang, we braided hair, and we found ways to hide messages and to share. Like, there's so much creativity that came out of this difficult situation. Difficult's not a heavy enough word.
Yes.
um
Hmm.
so it's always reminds me, when things are difficult for me, that I come from a history of people who have endured.
Have endured. And again, it's like through all, like again, found, claimed
Yeah.
joy, laughter, just remembered who they were and what their, what their culture was. And we, some people are like, oh, like we don't have, we're not connected to Africa, or I'm not African because I don't know. But the way, I mean, especially being in Louisiana, the foods that we eat,
Oh,
right?
yes.
The way that the seasonings that we use, you can't say that there's no attachment or that we don't have any, connection to. One of the things that it always gives me a chuckle, and I love reading like these stories about it, where I think it was like the cakewalk,
Mhm.
and how, when they used to do the cakewalk, I think it originated with, some enslaved people. They were basically like mocking the enslavers, right? They were like, oh, look at them all fancy and dressing in it. And then in the enslavers' mind, they're like, oh, look at these people. They're trying to be like us, but they can't. And it was like, no, no, we weren't trying to be like, we were making fun of y'all. And then it became this whole event
Yeah.
where like the enslaver would be like, oh, okay, you guys who you can do your dance, can do your little thing, can try to be like us because you want to be like us. And
Mhm.
then whoever wins or whoever does it best gets a cake. And I was like, is that not just like the perfect kind of like, you are actually paying us to mock you. You are actually paying us. Like, you are so in your own head that you think we want to be like you. And in all actuality, even in this like uneven, circumstance and imbalance, we still don't want to be you.
Yes.
And we're like making fun of you. You know what I mean? Like that you're like technically we're here and you're here, the way that you're thinking about it.
Mhm.
And yet we're still like, man, they crazy. Look at them dance this way, And I'm like, that is just again to your point, when I go through things or when I experience things or even see the world as it is now, I'm just like, okay. Or, like, it's like, okay, like we have seen hard things, we've experienced hard things. It's in, back to your comment around like the cellular, the physical, like that is in us, right? That is that ability, that bloodline, that blood of, being able to kind of again find joy, to mock, to like laugh, to like build connections, to build relationships. And I just think more and more about how much I wish that we would, as a people, and just all people, whatever their culture is, connect to some of those things,
Mhm.
and to embrace some of those things. Um, and I guess the last thing that I'll say is that it just felt like most of the stories that you hear about that time frame, that time period, and Black people in those in moments, it's such a story of victimization. And this was a place where it was like, oh, there was brutality, but there was also such like, I guess the only word is like resilience. There's such power. There was such a claim to, I am still a human. I am still going to claim and hold on to my humanity, and I am going to find ways to display my humanity, whether you see it and whether you accept it or not. I'm still going to find ways to have my basic rights. And
Makes
it
me think
was,
of the Maya Angelou poem, which can't think of the whole, I can't even think of the name of the poem. The line that comes to me is that I am the hopes and the dreams of a slave. And that's
mm-hmm,
always resonated with me because I have a doctorate. Like I
yeah,
am the hopes of, like, that you and I are, when people were enslaved, part of their resilience and endurance was the hope someday,
mm-hmm,
someday, one of my ancestors will have these things, get these things, achieve these things, have this freedom that we don't have now. So
mm-hmm,
that's one of the other things that I often resonates with me and I hold on to, especially during challenging times, is to know that I am the embodiment of the
yes,
hopes and the dreams of slaves,
and
the enslaved, the enslaved. Let me correct myself.
I love that, and I also think about what was that prayer and what was that dream? Because I don't know that the dream was like, oh, I want them to be wealthy and living in that big house. It was probably, I want them to be free. I want them to
Yes.
experience joy. So, as we today and future try to grow and build and participate in this world that we're living in, remember that part of the prayer too. It wasn't just, I want them to be in the position of the enslaver and I want them to have all the control.
Mhm.
It was, I want them to be free. freedom to love, freedom to sleep, to rest, to laugh, to have joy, to touch one another, to hug, all of those things. And so I think it's like it's a call to action, a reminder for us to always do those things.
Right.
And, when I think about, and this is a whole other conversation, but just around, relationships and things like that in the Black community and what sometimes is challenging, it's like I think we've forgotten that part of it, right? We've forgotten that, like, their dream for us was to love each other. The dream for us was to love freely, was to do all of these things. And now we've, I think, some of us have lost our way, or, as a collective, maybe there's more that we could be doing, or to be doing it differently.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, so
Yeah.
long kind of message to say the Whitney Plantation is definitely, if you are in Louisiana and have some time, it is definitely a place that I would strongly recommend. And I envision myself going back probably periodically. One, just to because it's a not-for-profit, obviously, organization. So to support and to give back. They have a beautiful bookstore in there. I was like, I have to run out of here because I'm about to sweep this whole shelf into my bag and be like, just one of everything, and I'll figure it out later. But it was just very beautiful. And like I said, I actually walked away, I actually said, because I sat down and started to like write and jot some things down that were coming to me. And I said, they feel at peace.
Mm.
They feel at peace because they are heard and they are seen. So that was really beautiful. So definitely check that out. I think there's one more that I would, because there's in that area, there's like like a string of kind of plantations. I don't think I'd go to any others over there. I just haven't heard anything about them,
Mhm.
except maybe like, oh, the property is beautiful. But as far as like telling the story, but there is another plantation that is called the Woodland Plantation.
Mhm.
And that was recently purchased by twin sisters, Black women.
Oh,
Have you heard about
yeah.
this?
I think I saw that on.
And they've actually traced their ancestors to this plantation. So they have recently purchased it and have plans. I believe it's being run as a Airbnb type of thing, but I don't know what else or if there's anything else that they're planning to do. So I want to keep an eye on that one. But I just love the idea that they were able to like trace their family's history and heritage, and then to go back and actually purchase it. And then both of those locations were part of the 1811 German Coast Uprising, which is one of the largest uprisings and revolts in the US. So
Mm.
I thought that was also, and they did a little, at the Whitney Plantation, they had a little area where you could learn more about it. There was a lot on the audio. And then they also had like some artwork that like supported and honored those that were involved in the uprising. So
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
of course, of course.